This video was made possible by CuriosityStream. Support Extremities and enhance your viewing experience by signing up for the CuriosityStream Nebula Bundle deal at curiositystream.com/extremities. In September 2019, as the short, sweet Alaskan summer began to slip into fall, a team of US Navy divers slipped into the waters of the Adak harbor to inspect the remains of the FV Heritage. Stranded, partially sunk, and rotting away after a decade run aground, the mobile diving and salvage team deemed the fishing boat beyond saving and removed the impediment one waterlogged chunk at a time. The scrapping was a training exercise, an opportunity for the diving team to work in the cold waters of the North Pacific. But the exercise also helped the tiny town of Adak as the removal reopened a pathway for fishing boats. While small in scope, the training represented a significant moment. Capturing the attention of locals in the Alaskan press, it signaled that, perhaps, after decades of dormancy, the US military and its massive budget may well be returning to the island. Almost 1,200 miles or 1,900 kilometers from Anchorage, and nearly equidistant from Seattle and Tokyo, Adak Island and the town of Adak, the westernmost city in the US, captures a sense of the sublime that few mainland American landscapes foster.
It's right on the wall inside the terminal. As soon as you get off the airplane and go inside the air terminal, birthplace Adak, birthplace of the winds. The winds can be as high as 125, 130 miles an hour sometimes. And that's hurricane force.
Here, these unrelenting winds whip across barren grasslands, up volcanic peaks, and across protected bays, navigating a landscape that one journalist described as, quote, devastatingly beautiful, a location as remote as anywhere in the United States. But life here isn't solely informed by isolation. Certainly the how, the day-in, day-out logistical challenges of living on the island, revolve around its remoteness, but the why, the reason this island is inhabited at all, is a function of Adak's position, spatially and temporally, as a place in between.
There's a little piece of rock in the middle of the North, but then when you kind of go out a little bit, China, Japan, Asia, North America, Pacific, it's in the middle of a lot of other things, relatively.
Spatially, so far down the Aleutian Island chain, Adak effectively straddles the divide between East and West. Temporally, Adak currently occupies a between space too, as conflicts that influenced the island, World War II and the Cold War, are in the past, but geopolitical rivalries of a similar ilk are beginning to heat up as the Arctic melts, leaving the island in a precarious, potentially short-lived, peacetime lull. Today, with the town bar closed, the restaurant out of business, and the fish processing plant belly up, Adak's primary visitor draw is its natural bounty.
I'm able to get guests again to go out hunting, and that's where I'm booking up. At least half of my bookings are just for hunters to get food to put on their table for their families.
There's people that work in tourism. There's a sizable caribou herd there, and people come out and hunt caribou. There's bird watchers, 200 and some odd species of birds come through there.
On an island where caribou outnumber people about 10 to 1, wildlife and the opportunity to secure quality food pulls people across the Pacific to this isolated Aleutian island. And it's been this way for millennia. While the island's punishing winds and incessant precipitation make it difficult for archaeologists to paint a full picture of the place's historical habitation, it's understood that Aleut people inhabited the island as early as 9,000 years ago. Long before Americans introduced caribou to the islands, Aleuts subsisted off their rich marine surroundings, hunting seals, fishing, and building shelters on the treeless island with whale bones. Subsistence outlined life on the island for thousands of years. But this era ended abruptly with the arrival of Russian sailors in the 1740s. Prosperous maritime fur trade led to both partnerships and violence between Russian trappers and Aleuts, allowing Adak to bloom into a nearly 200-person trading post by 1827. By the time the US purchased Alaska in 1867, though, the Aleutian fur trade had slowed due to overhunting, and the island's Aleutian population had relocated. Designated as a national wildlife refuge in 1910 by the US, and occasionally visited by Aleut hunting parties, the island returned to a state of quiet. That was until another world power arrived on the Aleutian island chain in the 1940s. In 1935, Billy Mitchell, a veteran and former Army general, stated in front of Congress that, in the future, quote, "Whoever holds Alaska will hold the world." In early August 1942, 9 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, it became evident that Mitchell wasn't the only one to identify the state's strategic importance, as Japanese forces made landfall on the islands of Kiska and Attu, an invasion that triggered an aggressive response by the US, ultimately resulting in an increased American presence on Adak that would define life on the island for the next 50 years.
So Adak during World War II and then leading into the Cold War was a tip of the spear, in a sense, that allowed some of the early air operations, first against Attu and Kiska in general, but then part of the retaking of the overall Pacific in general.
Well, the military came here during World War II, and they built a base immediately because Japanese had taken over 2 American soils, and it's the only American soil ever occupied by a foreign country during a war, was these 2 islands next to us. So the United States says, no, we're taking our islands back. So they started up Adak, and they built the base in about 8 days, put in the landing strip, brought out the troops, and there was 90,000 troops on the island here with about 10,000 Quonset huts. They went over and attacked the other islands and took them back over and said, okay, we're gonna stay here and make sure they don't do that again.
Japan didn't do it again, but when World War II ended, the US didn't just pack up and leave Adak. The military dug in further. In the decades that followed, as the Soviet Union turned from ally to enemy, Adak transformed from a collection of hastily constructed Quonset huts huddled around the airstrip to a permanent settlement with permanent buildings capable of standing up to the island's hurricane-force wind. As American conflicts transitioned from primarily physical and violent to those defined by deception and intelligence, Adak shifted from a staging position to an information hub.
So it was in between everything. We could watch the Russians, they could watch us, we'd look at their submarines, they'd look at ours, they'd look at our ships, blah, blah, blah. So the Cold War was big, and that's during the period I was here, during the Cold War era. And that's why I was so busy here.
While still a base, Adak became a town, a community.
Some soldiers did their tour there, they'd request another tour. Say, oh, I like this, my family's gonna come up here. Some people retiring there, so little by little, roots get put down, fishing industry develops along with the military. So, from its peak of World War II, you have the population going, 3,000, up to 6,000. So the average was up there, a lot of transient military population that came and went, but all the while kind of building that permanent community as well.
When Steve Carroll moved to Adak in 1987, it wasn't because of the island's remoteness or its natural beauty. He, like many, moved there for a job. Carroll arrived to serve as fire chief on a base that, at the time, didn't look or function so differently than any other American community.
This place was booming. We had a commissary, we had a PX, we had food, we had infrastructure, we had a bowling alley, we had swimming pools, everything.
With a population pushing 6,000, Adak was one of the largest towns in Alaska in the 80s and 90s. In just a few decades, the town had developed into a thoroughly Americanized cityscape, and if it weren't for the wind or the dearth of trees, a visitor might have mistaken it for any town USA, as suburban-style housing, cul-de-sacs, and even a McDonald's, drive-through and all, surrounded the base. Then the Soviet Union collapsed, and with it went the justification to bankroll an extension of American power over the western end of the Aleutian Islands. As part of the post-Cold War military drawdown, the Adak Naval Air Facility officially closed on March 31st, 1997.
It went from about 6,000 or so in 1990 down to about 350 in 2000. The legislation that started to close bases happened in about 1994. That got the ball rolling. By 1997, most of the permanent troops were gone.
With little reason to stay, nearly all of the island's population left, abandoning $3 billion worth of modern facilities, housing, and infrastructure. A long-awaited peace across the Pacific meant that the Alaskan boomtown was on the verge of busting. By the summer of 1997, Adak's population hovered around 100. Wind ripped at the sidings and roofs of abandoned buildings. Tundra began overtaking the tarmac of the McDonald's drive-thru. In just months after its decommissioning, Adak's era of prosperity had come to a screeching halt. What the past 24 years have borne out, though, is that the end of a boom doesn't always mean bust.
I could say some sad things, but I won't. Like, I go out my front door of my house and I used to see children riding by on their bicycles all the time. I'm the only one that lives on my street now. So that's that part. You know, I miss the camaraderie of all the people. But what we do have on the island, we all love each other on this island. There's no hatred between any of us. We watch out. I haven't taken the keys out of the ignition of any of the vehicles I've brought onto this island. I don't even think I have a key to my front door.
While the US military brought people to the exposed island by the thousands for decades, many, in the years following, have found the landscape, the quiet, the tight-knit community, and the infrastructure left behind reason enough to move to the island, or at least visit. Rather than becoming home to a handful of hopeless romantics too tied to the landscape to leave, Adak transitioned from bustling base to a small, retrofitted, quirky, but very much connected town. In 2001, Adak officially became an incorporated city. Its population of 316, a diverse plurality made up of white, indigenous, Asian, and Hispanic peoples. With the Navy's departure, the city, along with the Aleut Corporation, set up to administer land settlements and run businesses on behalf of the Aleut people, have purchased land and infrastructure from the military for the community's purposes. These days, an Anchorage-bound Alaska Airlines Boeing 737 takes off twice a week from Adak Airport, a repurposed Navy landing strip now comically over-equipped for its current role as a small regional airport. The town's handful of children still head to the oversized school that now also serves a host of municipal functions.
So yeah, but full-size school, fairly new, but the base just closed abruptly. Everybody left, and now we're just using a small wing of it. The city is in control of it, but everything is within the school. The school is there. The city offices are within the old school. The small clinic is still there. So they're adapting.
Fishing boats and the fish processing plant, though closed at the moment, take advantage of the deepwater port and the airport to bring in people and ship out seafood, resulting in tax revenue, employment opportunities, and customers for local businesses. And if it's not hired hands hopping off the flight from Anchorage, it's visitors looking to take in the views of volcanic peaks, fish the island's crystalline streams and coasts, or hunt the caribou introduced decades prior.
The hunting, number one for people coming here. Fishing, a lot of people come here for the fishing for the salmon, the dolly vardens, the halibut, the deep sea fishing, stuff like that. And then we get a lot of birders and flower people during this season. The birders come to see the migration of the birds, and the birds stop off here. And so they'll sit here for 3 weeks straight with their binoculars on and just watch these birds come in. And these are rare birds that nowhere else in the world except here on Adak.
Hardly a run-of-the-mill rural American town, a full 24-hour travel day away from the nation's capital, dotted with decaying Cold War-era buildings, boasting gas prices that can run north of $6 a gallon, maintaining Adak's modern conveniences requires a lot from its residents.
I have 4 different jobs on this island. I run my hotel. I'm the UPS guy. I take care of the GCI telephone exchange on the island, and I'm the official weather observer on the island.
But for those that have arrived here in the island's post-base era, the extra hassle is worth the independence it enables.
They know they're on the frontier. They know they gotta tough it out and be a little rough sometime. But what do they get out of it? They get left alone in many cases. And so there's not everybody, but there is that mentality in Adak.
It was probably the serenity of it more than anything else. It was not a hustle bustle like San Diego or Los Angeles or, big town cities, New York, whatever you want to call it.
While Adak's residents have persevered in the wake of the Navy's departure, the last few years have proven difficult. Mismanagement led to the closure of the fish processing plant, a lack of traffic made it too difficult to keep open the few local bars and restaurants, and COVID shut down the island's tourism industry entirely. Though the post-COVID return to travel has reinvigorated tourism, and the town hopes that new ownership will get the plant back up and running sooner than later, this recent lull has shown that making it work here within such a small, fickle economy is a precarious pursuit, and that forces far beyond Adak's beaches have the power to turn the place's economy upside down. But the inverse is true too, that the rest of the world's dealings may very well reposition Adak from the remote edge back to the strategic center. In August 2020, a fleet of Russian ships ripped across the Bering Sea as part of the country's first large-scale military exercise in the region since the Soviet era. Capturing global attention because of the operation's scale and its tense incursion into the US's exclusive economic zone, the military exercise was another example, along with increasing fleet sizes, upgraded Arctic bases, and new radar stations, that Russia is investing heavily in the Arctic. As is China, which, though not exactly Arctic adjacent, sees itself as a future, quote, polar great power and views the Arctic as a region ripe for future military competition. While it's hard to see climate change-induced military tension as a net positive, it may very well offer a welcomed boost to Adak.
Some of the boosters or supporters in Adak, some with the city, some with the tribe, they always hope that, I don't want to say hope necessarily, that things evolve to the point that, I want to be a little bit careful, that something like that would happen, like another Cold War, and Adak would be right there. The infrastructure would be there, the deep water ports would be there, for them to kind of jump in and say, we're the spot to be re-upped, restarted.
It's looking like the military will be back sooner or later to keep an eye on the bad guys overseas. And it's a very strategic place because the cove where the piers are is deep enough to house 3 aircraft carriers, and it's the only island on the Aleutian chain that can.
Conversations are ongoing as to what a return of the military would look like on the Aleutian Islands, and most are occurring behind closed doors. Officials, though, have pointed out that a full-scale return to Adak is unlikely, as retrofitting and reopening the abandoned and rundown facilities would cost a staggering $1.3 billion. Longtimers like Steve recognize that while terms like a new Cold War are increasingly thrown around in conversations over the Bering Strait and the Arctic, it's difficult to imagine that Adak returns to its Cold War glory days. Still, even if it's not thousands relocating to the island, but a couple hundred, Adak would certainly welcome the windfall. On the off chance the military doesn't show up at all, though, Adak is bound to persist. Residents continue to leverage their retrofitted facilities, talk up their surrounding fisheries, welcome in marine biologists and ornithologists, and tour around fishers, birdwatchers, history buffs, and caribou hunters.
Some of these folks they've stayed there long enough, and maybe it was the wind or maybe it was something else, that they've developed this rugged frontier type of attitude that we're gonna eke out a living here. We're gonna stay. And whatever the ups and downs,
driven by the independent, stubborn spirit that brought them to the island in the first place, or the deep admiration for the place that develops over decades, Adak's residents simply won't fold.
Yeah, because it hasn't busted. We haven't busted. We refuse to bust. We totally refuse to bust. No, we are keeping this place going. We are going to keep it going.
Whether geopolitical conflict across the Pacific returns the island to the center, or it remains on the far western edge, Adak will remain. And while there's so much to figure out going forward, its residents are taking it day by day.
It's hard for me to articulate exactly what it is about this island because I'm just totally in love with it. So it's, why? People always ask why, and I says, I can't give you a full answer. It's just the beauty is, every morning I get up, I walk out front, I check my rat traps, every morning, because we got lots of rats on the island. And so, and I walk out my front door and I look to see if Mount Moffat's visible. That tells me we're gonna have a really good day if you can see the top of Mount Moffat. And that's a rare occasion, but if you see it, I just smile and go, it's gonna be a good day on Adak.
2,000 miles, 3,000 kilometers, 3 flights, and 17 hours of travel away from Adak, there's another Alaskan town with another fascinating story: Ketchikan. Last year, it had its strangest summer ever, when none of the million tourists that flocked to the small town during the 4-month cruise season arrived. This challenged the fundamental social and economic system of a place so reliant on this annual phenomenon, so myself and a camera crew traveled there to document it. We released the documentary that came of that, Alaska's Silent Summer, on Nebula. That's, of course, because Nebula was designed from the ground up by creators to enable big projects like this, along with other types of content that just don't work on YouTube. It may not be too obvious from the consumer perspective, but the economic model, the production team, the marketing, everything behind the scenes was crafted to allow creators to create without the constraints of other platforms. We also want people to see the stuff we make on Nebula, so we've made it insanely easy to get access by partnering with CuriosityStream, which is also home to an enormous catalog of top-notch nonfiction shows and documentaries, such as The Origin of Land, about an expedition to document and research Earth's newest piece of land as it was formed by a volcanic eruption. You can watch this, and Alaska Silent Summer, and anything else from either the CuriosityStream or Nebula catalogs when you sign up for any subscription at curiositystream.com/extremities, which comes out to as little as $1.23 a month with the annual subscription during the current sale. Signing up will help support Extremities, loads of other independent creators, and unlock 2 enormous catalogs of stuff you'll actually watch, so check out the bundle deal at curiositystream.com/extremities.